And okay, before I open the discussion to the floor and give you a say, I would like to have a very brief and quick statement from all three of you. What would be your definition of a pluralist macroeconomics? So just one quick statement about that. And I think we start with Sebastian.
I think pluralist macroeconomics makes sense in teaching in a way that you present different macroeconomic paradigms and make the students aware of that there are different paradigms and where the differences lie, so that they can build on that. For research, I'm not sure how one person could reasonably do pluralist macroeconomics, because at one point you have to decide for one assumption or the other.
I think real pluralism is giving space and supporting space to different views and supporting minority perspectives, without favoring one over the other in at least in introductory teaching. And I think it is also about keeping pluralism. So alliances are, of course, okay. That's how things move. But alliances against a dominant view, for example, risk, I think, that there is loss of pluralism rather than more pluralism.
I imagine a pluralist macroeconomics to, like it was already maybe mentioned before, to being able to have different styles of thought to approach questions or phenomena that you observe, and to try to maybe bring those together, for example, which is already happening in some books between post-Keynesian and Marxian approaches. And on the other hand, maybe as an idea of also having this macroeconomic, or the fact that macroeconomic must be plural, also reflected in policy advice, for example, so that there's a conscience that there's not, that there's different answers, but also different fundamental big starting points.
Thank you very much. And now I open the discussion to the floor. And so the floor is the floor. Yeah, so in the front and over there. Okay. Please, again, as soon as you get the mic. So the first question, okay, is over there. Please say your name and then you. Yeah, you can start. You can start.
Okay, so hello, I'm Maria from Paris 13. I also was at PEPS, which is the French branch of the International Student Initiative for Pluralism in Economics. So first, my first question is, thank you very much, all of you. It was really interesting to see pluralism in action. But my first question is for Irene. You said that your new amazing curriculum is a response to rethinking economics. But why rethinking economics and not ICP? Because ICP is centered on teaching, and what you offer, it fits to a lot of points to what ICP advocates. Also, and for Janina, I wanted to ask if the German group has published a critique of core, because in PEPS we did one, but it's still unpublished, it's still in progress. But in PEPS we did a review chapter by chapter of core, and I participated to it, so I can just tell quickly what's in it. So mostly the problem of core is that it doesn't ask questions. It's like it presents economics like a way to have answers. So for me, the main problem in core is the lack of critical thinking. It's kind of responses to every question, and it doesn't really make the student think. And of course, there is a problem with the presentation of the different paradigms, which is almost absent. So, for instance, about Marx, they say, yeah, at some point there was class struggle, but now it's over. like one sentence in a footnote. I fell off my chair when I was reviewing the chapter. So if you're interested in the critique of core, well, PEPS is going to publish it at some point, hopefully. So it's PEPS Economy, so you can just Google it and you'll find our website. We have a page in English, and the review is going to be in English. And Sebastian, I wanted to ask if, first, who uses Dsge models exactly? Because when I talk to mainstream economists, they say, oh yeah, but central bankers don't actually use Dsges, so I don't know if they lie to me because they don't want to be criticized or if it's true. So are Dsge really the norm or not? Because I've heard that, yes, central banks and all, they use different sorts of models. And whether the Krugman, Romer, Solow, and DeLong, they are for the end of Dsge, but do they offer an alternative of what the next macroeconomic models should be? Thank you very much.
So I think we can collect some more questions. The next one is Andrea in the front.
No, Andrea Terzi, Franklin University. I found this session very interesting, and providing one answer to one of the questions that the conference had asked: what has changed in the last 20 years? And this is evident as much has changed, and more will change. But I may have some questions, but with the chair permission, I would like to share a 1-minute entertainment which has to do with pluralism, because I just received a tweet from Mr. Jens Spahn. I did a tweet yesterday in response to an interview where saying that if public debt in the whole world went to zero, German exports would collapse. And this may be interesting also to the conference, and also, for example, to Jörg Bibov, who presented something on anti-Keynesianism in Germany. So he responds to my tweet. In fact, he sent 2 tweets, and I checked. It's a genuine account. It's not a fake account. He says, it won't be zero forever, but it should be zero in good times to enhance resilience for bad times. Ask Keynes. And the second is, our economy is doing very well, and because the idea was, if debt didn't spill over on Germany, Germany would not do that well. And here what he answers: our economy is doing very well, and debt making in Germany won't spill over to bring growth to Greece or Spain.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next one was Andrew what? No. Here in the front.
Yes, thanks, Andrew Watt from the IMK. Thanks for the presentations. At least 2 of the presenters picked up on this idea of sort of taking paradigmatic approaches. Let me say a few thoughts on that. I mean, I have to say I'm a little bit torn on that issue. I think there are some good things and some bad things with that idea. I think for teaching purposes and for making people aware, in contrast to the likes of Mankiw, that you sort of imply there's a sort of one unified body of knowledge, that to make students aware that there are differences and disagreements amongst the economists, I think is very valuable. Where I worry a bit is about this sort of the labeling, right? That all these sort of paradigmatic debates imply putting, sort of categorizing ways of thought in rather narrow boxes and putting labels on it. I think that encourages a sort of a block building. I think it risks things like making differences of degree into sort of absolute categorical differences. So if I can give an example, if one says something like, New Keynesian economics allows for real effects of monetary policy in the short run, post-Keynesian economists allows for real effects in the short and long run, right? And implying that there's a sort of absolute dividing line between these two very different views where, okay, you just need to think about what's the meaning of short and long run to imagine that there's some scope in the middle there for for people to also to agree or to take a sort of middle range view on that. So I wonder, and I suspect I'm going to annoy some people now. I mean, I notice also here, I have to say, the number of papers that are given which put the school of thought in the title of the presentation, and I always wonder a little bit about that, whether that's really, whether one shouldn't say, I'm discussing an issue about, let's say, distribution, and I'm going to tell you the best model and the best approach that I think is suitable for discussing that issue, and by signaling already in the title the paradigm into which I'm putting myself, I wonder whether that's also helpful. I think that encourages people who perhaps don't agree just to sort of ignore the papers, and it encourages sort of block building. There may be counter arguments to that. I don't know. I'm interested to hear the views not just of the panelists but also some other colleagues. But anyway, those are my thoughts on that issue.
Thank you very much, Andy. There was Michalis in the back.
Hi, my name is Michalis Nikiforos from the Livy Institute. I would like to make a comment on Sebastian's presentation, which also is related to a previous question about the Dsge models. I think it's very important what you emphasize, that the Dsge models at heart, they are supply-side models with frictions. So as a result, if you remove these frictions, then this has a very positive impact on growth. This is important at the policy level because, for example, when the troikas came to Southern Europe, they recognized the effect that the contractionary effect of fiscal austerity, but at the same time they argued that by removing the so-called frictions in the labor market, that would compensate this contractionary effect of fiscal policy, right? So this is how they justified the over-optimistic projections that they were making in 2010 and 2011. Unfortunately, this didn't work out. A second important thing, which I think it's also very important at the policy level, is that these models, they assume that the demand effects take place only in the short run. So it's very explicit if you read the reports of the troikas or the Congressional Budget Office in the US or the IMF and so on, that they have a short time period for 1 or 2 years, and then the projections and the model reverses to a fully neoclassical model where the projections are determined completely from the supply side. A second comment, I'm not sure if the people you mentioned, like Krugman and so on, are in favor of a revolution in economics. I'm doubtful about that. There are some comments that they have made about heterodox economics that they are very, very critical. And a question for the whole panel. I would like to ask you, what do you think is to go back to Myrdal, what is the political element in economic theory, and how important you think that this is for a new revolution in economic theory? I mean, we see now in the US that from the political point of view and in the political arena, there is a shift in the attitude towards free trade, and then immediately you have economists who were arguing in favor of free trade for many decades saying, well, yeah, also the theory and the empirical facts maybe support the view that free trade is not always beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will collect 2 more questions and then I will close the first round. So over there and over there. And I would like to hand it over to the second round, okay? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Raphael Wilder, Kingston University. I have a question for Sebastian. First of all, I really like the presentation, and if you could send me the slide with the heliocentric and geocentric system, I think that's a very, very good slide. I really enjoyed that, especially because they move. It's awesome. But you said that there can't be pluralism in research, and I'm wondering myself whether that's too narrow. Because if I think about, for example, complexity economics, and if we see it as a different paradigm than post-Keynesian economics, I don't see why that can't be there as well. But I would also go further and also include at least some parts of the behavioral literature. I mean, I'm not thinking about a behavioral Dsge model where they have some behavioral ingredient there, but why an empirical paper which uses a utility function at some point can produce interesting and valid results from which we can learn something if there's a good insight there. I don't see why there is no space for something like that. So yeah, maybe you can elaborate why you think that there really is no place for pluralism in research. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then over there on my right-hand side. Please say your name.
Hello, Antoine Monserrand from Paris 13 as well. Yeah, the question of the session was plural macroeconomics. Where do we go from here? I would just have a comment on what Sebastian said on the different goals we can have when we do macro in academia. And I agree fully with what you said, but I would add one, which is in top of spreading economic policy ideas among other academics and among policymakers. One major goal to me is to spread policy ideas among citizens. Or maybe you view citizens as policymakers. That could be a way out of my question. But because I think the most important and the most likely to happen is not to convince Angela Merkel or Mariano Rajoy to end austerity and so on, but it's to talk and convince German and Spanish citizens. And I think even just explaining clearly the paradox of cost, the paradox of thrift, of that simple things that are really, established now, and we shouldn't, we're not arguing with, would help people understand what macro is, because people reason with what they see in life, and they only see micro, and that's why they just don't understand what we're saying. And they see these small businesses with too much taxes, and they can't understand these paradox unless we explain them clearly. And also on pluralism and the link with politics, we had a recent very strong attack in France against pluralism, a book from Mr. Cahuc and Zilberberg, maybe you've heard of. I don't know if it went out from away from France. And this is a strong attack. They even say these guys, they name some researchers, they say these guys shouldn't be invited anymore in the media. They shouldn't talk anymore. And the subtitles, well, the title of the book is The Economic Negationism, yes. And then the subtitle is And How to Get Rid of. So it's really a call for eradication of heterodox. And it has a little bit of success, not so much, but in the general public, people are buying this book. And this is a political book, and that's why I'm in favor of pluralism and teaching the people, not only the students, for political fight.
Thank you very much. So I close the list for now, and would like to give the say to the panel again. And I would like to start in reverse order now and start with Janina.
All right. So regarding the first question, of course we read the reception of the PEPs and the work that you did on reviewing the core. Yeah, and we very much appreciate it, and I think we could maybe, or we actually probably need to draw again and again, or more recently on it. It was just the case that in Germany it has been arriving like with a presentation on this conference of the German Economic Association, and it's actually something one has to keep in mind that well, resources lead to some kind of expansion of those materials, and that we just have to have an eye on it. I mean, it's probably difficult to stop actually, because I think when young researchers which have been brought up with a paradigm of neoclassic, then it maybe seem very, very logic to choose something like this, an online PDF which has very already like pedagogical links or pedagogical tools, etc., which will be kind of maybe already a bit of a monopoly on that side. The other question regarding the paradigmatic approach that we also choose as a network with this webpage, which is going to be launched. Yeah, it's true. It might be that when you look at these different paradigms, then you like get more and more into its logic and kind of see it as maybe the only truth. But actually, I think it's also a learning process, so that if you really want to tackle questions, then you will like I don't know, see to the left and to the right what's there, which will help you to enhance the question you actually want to pose or answer. And we had today there was a panel for ecological macroeconomics, and there was Stefan presented his PhD thesis, and he went through through a lot of models in neoclassical and post-Keynesian and in Marxist theories, and looked like where can I build in a degrowth or a no-growth scenario. And so you can use it also as a toolkit and see what's there, what works best. So it's not like because there's the openness to actually also use a neoclassical model if it's better, or you can use the other model if that is better. But the idea still behind it is that if you use this model, you are aware of the shortages which come within modeling, and that actually for the bigger story you can. It's good to have some kind of more socioeconomic thinking. Last question was the implications for politics. It's interesting to debate. I think when we were in a discussion with Rüdiger Bachmann from the VfS this year at the conference, he said, well, the problem is actually in Germany we have some research institutes, but everyone kind of knows what those research institutes will say. So if I'm against a minimum wage, I go to the IFO Institute. If I'm a bit more open, and then I go to the DWI. So I found this actually interesting point. And in the US, it's a bit different because they have those elite institutions, and then people from the elite institutions go to policy. But I wanted to stress, I mean, it fits the experiences you've been making in France. It rather fits the idea that it's not all pluralistic, or it's not pluralistic at all what's going on in policy and also in public opinion. But it is that kind of that is actually a more kind of a hegemonic discourse or hegemonic pictures that are there and that discredits some arguments by people who try to think critically, and this quite easily. So I think maybe in between something a bit more pragmatic, and but always having in mind that the neoliberal credo is already in our lives and in our heads. Yeah.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, the work I do on pluralism in economic teaching is not just a response to the Rethinking Economics movement. It's, of course, to everybody who would like to see more pluralism, like also the more original ones, like the Post-Statistic Economics Network, and the movement of PhD students in Cambridge and so on. I just mention this because it's I think the widest international network, the Rethinking Economics movement, but certainly not the only one. The paradigmatic shift that it risks labeling and boxing, and perhaps makes it more difficult to find middle positions, and perhaps also the uneasiness of sticking a label on yourself. I recognize that, and I think I think we find this difficult because it's not the standard in economics, but economics is an exception. In every other science, there are different paradigms next to each other. In sociology, in chemistry, in physics, and it's very normal that we have different theories with different worldviews. But in economics, we are not used to this. It is as if we then are immediately in a battle and fighting for hegemony. And that's a pity. So perhaps we should look more at how other sciences do that, and how people in other sciences feel comfortable in a scientific debate with different paradigms next to each other. On how important the political element in economics is, well, I find that very important. And I think it should not be left to little corners of political economy, but should remain part and parcel of economic departments. And this links to the last question, that economic teaching should also be for, say, ordinary people to engage more informed in political debates. And I agree, macroeconomics seems very abstract for people. So I think we have a responsibility also to engage in what is known as economic literacy. For example, I developed a very simple version, or basically developed further a very simple version of what other people already developed, the World Trade game, in which people can play and figure out how countries with different resources and by trading over time, an accumulation process leads to more inequality. But that was also the driving force for me to develop this MOOC, which is for ordinary people. You don't need to be any registered student in a university. It's freely available online, and if you want to get a certificate, it's $50.
Thanks. Sebastian?
Let me start with the question, who uses Dsge models nowadays? I mean, first, I would say most of the mainstream macroeconomic departments use them. If you look at the journals on top of the on the lists used by most institutions to hire, and look at the macroeconomic journals, most of the articles there, at least which have a whole economy model, use Dsge models. I would say any self-respecting central bank has its own Dsge model, at least for the OECD countries. For other countries, you then run into data issues, so they might not have it. the ECB has one, the Fed has one. It doesn't mean that they believe what the models give out, because they are well aware that they are not very useful for forecasting. And I think this has been very nicely presented in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, where they were completely off the mark. And this is why central banks also use models which are, well, problematic from the Lucas critique. They usually tend now to have a host of models. But in academia, in mainstream academia, Dsge models are still the mainstay for macroeconomics. And there is nothing, at least I don't know of any model which is anywhere closely as accepted as Dsge models. That's why I'm still discussing them. The question, do Roma and Krugman really want a revolution, or well, because they have written something ugly about heterodox economists. I think you need to be aware that revolution in the sense of Thomas Kuhn means replacing the existing paradigm by something new. Just because they don't like the heterodox approaches doesn't mean that they want to stick with the status quo. So they might be in favor of a revolution, but against the heterodox taking over. Yeah. So still. And maybe something good comes out of getting rid, and I think something good might come out of getting rid of the current stance of macroeconomics, even if we don't know yet what's coming out of that. The next thing was, can there be pluralism in research? I completely agree with you that you can have a model where you have behavioralist things, maybe you get some or behavioral elements to maybe explain consumption, then you get sociological elements for some labor market things, and you have a framework which is post-Keynesian. But this I wouldn't call multi-paradigmatic or pluralist. This is something which is eclectic. You take one element here, one element there which fits. That's completely fine. Pluralism, at least how I would define it, is giving not equal space, but at least adequate space to a number of different paradigms, different ways of explaining things. And I cannot, or for me it's very difficult to see how you would want to do that in one piece of empirical research. It's just, I think there you have to make a decision at some point. That doesn't mean that you can make some research in one paradigm here and some research in another paradigm there. The last thing, in how far I want to spread ideas among citizens, yes, that's something I didn't put explicitly on that list. I probably would have put it under pedagogy, because it's explaining economic mechanisms to persons who are not very well acquainted with them.
Okay, thanks a lot. We may have a second round of questions, and I would like to remind you that every statement or every question should be brief. Yeah, so we had one on the left-hand side over there.
Thank you very much for those interesting inputs. I would be interested on the panelists' opinion on the question whether pluralism in macroeconomics also means pluralism in methods. And if you agree, like what would this mean to you, and how do you evaluate the current status quo?
Then we have one question in the back, in the middle.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm Ferran Portella. I'm coming from the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. I just wanted first to make a comment and then pose the question. My comment is, there's actually plurality in the neoclassical school, in marginalism. For example, in macroeconomics nowadays, there's people publishing from there are new Keynesians, new classicals, new consensus, post-war Raysians, and also in just to name a few, in marginalism there are also very different ideologies. We can see there are ultra-liberal people, conservatives, people that call themselves leftists like Krugman, Stiglitz, and so on, and more sadly, analytical Marxists. I would say that that's what allows them to maintain the distinction between science and ideology, but nonetheless it will remain always profoundly ideologic, since it denies the political and historical nature of social reality. That change is beyond our capacities because society is governed by abstract laws, the law of supply and demand, these abstract laws like, I don't know, gravity, like in nature. So I would say that perhaps in order to promote real pluralism, wouldn't you think it would be better to introduce seriously into the curricula history, politics, sociology, and so on? Thank you.
Thanks. And there was one question here in the front by Joan.
Thank you, Johan Maasken, Maastricht University. We have been seeing some very interesting ideas how curricula could look like when you want to present them to first-year students. But an interesting question is, of course, how do we succeed in getting the university to accept these curricula, and how do we persuade them to do this? And maybe you have some thoughts on that, because that would be a very important issue, I think. And in that direction also, I wonder whether yesterday in the panel there was a lot of, well, several panelists argued that in research we should have cooperation between various branches of research to strengthen our fields and to get more momentum. And could we do the same in teaching? And could we also try to create organizations amongst academics where we start to promote these ideas? So these are two questions.
Thank you very much. Then we have Hans-Jörg in the front and in the back.
Hans-Jörg Herr, Berlin School of Economics and Law. I would like to commend Irene, because you made the interesting point in chemistry and physics. We have different paradigms at the same time, but not in economics. Why is this the case? I think the problem is in the paradigms in economics are based on certain ideological, political assumptions. And to come back to the nice presentation of all of you, but to Sebastian, when we go to Thomas Kuhn, the assumptions which are behind the different paradigms cannot be proved. And I think especially in economics, these assumptions cannot be proved. They are based on values, on what you have heard, what you have heard as a student. They cannot be proved. So my question is, how can we handle this complicated situation that ideology plays obviously a big role for the paradigm you choose as a person, and how can we have a kind of fair competition? That it's a little bit tricky. I think we should have a fair and friendly competition between the different paradigms, but maybe you have an idea how this can be handled.
There was one question in the back. And then I would like to slowly close the list, so if there are any more questions, please raise your hand now.
I would like to, Fábio Freitas from Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I would like to ask a broad, general question, which is, what is the relationship between pluralism and critical, mutual criticism?
Okay, thanks. So, sorry, what was your last word? Mutual criticism, or what did you? Mutual criticism. Okay. So I don't see any more hands, so I will give you the chance to answer again. Let's start with Sebastian this time.
Okay. Let me start with the question pluralism methods. Yes, I very strongly believe we need pluralism in method. It doesn't mean we should allow anything goes, but we definitely should move beyond some of the methods which mainstream economics is using. And I think especially about cross-country studies which we are having. Basically nowadays it's only accepted if you do a cross-country panel study, which sometimes has the problem if you take OECD countries or EU countries, you have a very small number of ends. And even if you have country-specific effects in there, the problem is that sometimes there is a story which is linked to the institutions, and it's too complicated to be covered in this. And well, if you have two countries which have a similar real estate bubble out of 12, where nothing happens, this might just already be enough if you have a rather long time series to show up as something really statistically significant, and we are still missing the story. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, my colleagues Barbara Fritz and Heike Jöpkes and me, we are working in a project on comparative development studies where we try to explore how you can use mixed methods, so combine traditional methods of econometrics with selected case studies to find out what has been going on in certain economies. And I think we need to look more closely into these things. And this is just an example. I think also it's difficult to do good case studies, but I think for macroeconomics, where institutions play a role, historical time plays a role, and we have a small number of countries, we really should push for rigorous case studies to find out and to answer some questions. But I guess there are many more methods which we should look into. Is there pluralism in neoclassical economics? Yes, there's pluralism also, as we learned, in post-Keynesian economics, and there's also pluralism in Minskian post-Keynesian models. But still, if I were only to teach Minskian post-Keynesian models to my students, I think this would be, it would not be a very good idea, even if you like these models. Sociology, history in the curriculum, maybe, but then the day only has 24 hours, and you only have so much time, and you need to cut at some point. So I think students, of course, should be aware of historical, sociological developments, but we cannot put everything in the curriculum, otherwise we don't have any time left for economics. Two things, how do we get that into the university curricula? I think this depends on your institutional setting. At my university, we can change the curricula, and the economists vote on that, and no one else is then doing anything. So we can just say, well, and we actually did this for undergraduate teaching, it's saying you have to have a multi-paradigmatic approach. We focus, well, I would say neoclassical economics gets more weight than others because we want our students to learn to criticize that, but it's in there that they have to learn about different paradigms, and then that's that. But I see that in other countries the setting is different, and in other institutions the setting is different, and of course you need majorities in your own department and you need to organize them. Last thing, Hans-Jörg, you said ideology plays such a large role in paradigms. What can we do about this? I believe the best chance really is to have, as you rightly said, to compete on empirics. Of course, that's a bit difficult because Dsge proponents say the business cycle is not predictable, therefore you cannot measure our models whether they predict the future or out of sample time series very well. But I think this is an argument which is circular and at least will not be accepted by the policymakers later. And if we manage to come up with an alternative which is better able to explain the empirics and predict empirics, then we have a chance to change this curriculum. And if something happens where some new facts come up which are strongly at odds, there might be the hope to at least convince some of the mainstream economists.
Thank you. Irene?
Thank you. Okay, on pluralism in macroeconomics, does that also imply pluralism in methods? I would say yes. My brief review of a couple of theories already indicated that they favor different methods. And I think we do see that. There's more than simply running regressions with secondary data, either time series or panel analysis or cross-section. There were historical approaches like Thomas Piketty. There is comparative analysis among the more institutionalist macroeconomists, particularly those concerned with growth, Darren Acemoglu, for example. So there are people who have quite an impact and take different approaches. So I think we should be bold and also claim the space for different approaches. Yeah, Johan, how to persuade universities to get pluralism in the curricula? Well, I'm in a lucky position because I teach in a development school, and development is by definition interdisciplinary. But I do see other colleagues struggling in economics departments. What in Rotterdam just has happened with the new curriculum is that there's now more space for history of economic thought and philosophy of economics. I think that's a good first step, because that makes students at least aware that there is more, and hopefully makes them asking critical questions. And because it's also a matter of creating a demand. If students don't demand anything else, then it's also difficult as teacher to push something different to the curriculum. But also, I think hiring broader skilled economists in department and teaching the big issues. My students, for example, are very much concerned with the big issues in the world, like growing inequality, like climate change. And I don't even need to explain them that narrow models that assume perfect information and rational, that they fall short of explaining this. They're critical, and when they're interested in these issues, they ask questions, and they won't be satisfied with these very abstract theoretical answers. Finally, pluralism and relationship with mutual criticism. Well, yeah, that is what you see indeed in other disciplines. Sociology, for example, there is debates between different paradigms and mutual criticism. But in economics, we don't have this institutional environment that stimulates this. So I think we first need to work on the institutional environment that helps us to have these debates of mutual respect between disciplines. One example is the top journals. A couple of decades ago, there were still debates going on in top journals between neoclassicals and Marxists and post-Keynesians. That doesn't happen anymore. They all have their own corners and their own journals. So that would be, I think, an institutional change that we very much need to get this debate going again.
Okay. Yeah, just really shortly on the pluralism in methods, and also on the topic of trying to bring in history of economic thought and sociology, which would be, well, the interdisciplinarity claim which the network of pluralism has made, and which actually needs to, or will be further developed, I think, with actual physical study programs which have pluralism in economics. And as Irene already mentioned, that with each school of thought, there is some, already some methods which are more meaningful or more important. And maybe to the last one, which is how to get pluralism into the curricula. Well, we have seen, or I've in my introduction, I said that right now, actually, the movement, or the movement for pluralism in economics is kind of a bottom-up process where students organize lectures, but it's obviously it's a tiring task to always have those events being planned by new people, and again. So the other new finding by a study by the University of Kassel, Beckenbach, and other, shows that, which is very interesting, I find, that the module handbooks of the university are differently strong specified. So actually, strong specified means they have actual points on what they need or what they make teachers, university teachers teach. And interestingly, the more like elite or the bigger university, like in Mannheim, in Munich, and I forgot the other university, those have very strict, very neoclassical module handbooks, and the other one, the smaller ones, have more open handbooks, so that would give the teachers actually, they have the freedom actually to teach other things. The other restrictions, whether it goes from the professors think or the teachers think that they cannot do this because then the students will kind of, I don't know, won't be able to catch up. And on the other hand, there's more specified curricula, for example, in the University of Bremen or Lüneburg, which have, Bremen has a cluster for complexity economics or a specificity, and Lüneburg, for example, in sustainable economics. So there's this one potential to try to change those module handbooks, maybe, and it's like a I don't know, what do you say, a comparative advantage maybe for some, to have, to really try to develop those special approaches, or which really touch upon the questions people are concerned with. And the other hand, really, as we have discussed, try to go in there with really good teaching material, which will step by step maybe convince teachers to change their teaching. And just a last comment, which maybe fits this this last point as well. Jeff van Trick and I are giving out a book, and many people who are also sitting here have been so nice to contribute to this book, which is which unites reviews of the most popular books like Samuelson, Mankiw, Krugman, and other, and really went into the book and displays how at different points critical or controversies have been left out, and how alternative would look like. And we are spreading those out as PDF and gratis to university. But if you're also interested to have a look at it and maybe spread it in your university to convince students who haven't been in touch with this discussion of pluralism, really see it's not just some rebel students who want to change something, but the long history of other schools of thought is vivid, and those papers are like around the corner and on the table over there. Thank you.
Just one remark to the book. I think it's a great project. The problem is it is now only in German. So if we would find a possibility to translate some of these critical reviews into English or other languages, that would be very helpful. So if someone has an idea, I think Janina is very open to listen to that.
Well, thanks to all of you. I will abuse my role as a chair again to raise a last, more cursory question, which is, so when you make a forecast from now on in 20 years, when we have the 40th anniversary of this conference, will we have such a discussion here again? And or in other words, what will macro look like or economics look like in 20 years? In 2 sentences. And we will start with Janina again.
I think it will be, I imagine it to be an open forum for people interested in political and economic issues, and maybe more like sociology is working right now, that they have different groups that they work on, but in the groups there's a plurality as well. And I would kind of imagine it to be like this, and also maybe engaging also more a bit with civil society, which is also already a tradition, but without losing kind of grip of the really like fundamental questions, which is maybe sometimes taking place in sociology. Yeah.
Thanks, Irene.
I hope that in 20 years from now, pluralism is the new normal, so that we don't even talk anymore about pluralism. And then perhaps linking to Hans-Jörg's question, because there is a lot of ignorance, so that's why I emphasize teaching. The generations of economists don't know anymore what Minsky said or who Minsky was, or Joan Robinson or Thorstein Veblen. So if we really are successful in educating new generations of economists, that will help enormously to get more pluralism. Just to give an example, a well-known Dutch professor of finance, I was with him in a meeting on new economics education curricula for secondary schools. And somebody was explaining that we need to have attention to different theories, and there was a supply-demand diagram up, and then he was very irritated, and he said, but you know, that's demand and supply, that's just neoclassical economics. And yet, if established professors are so ignorant that they just claim anything that they recognize as neoclassical economics and then don't want to think further, that there's a will to gain by educating new generations, and perhaps we should not waste too much time in fighting the debates with the generations that will have died out in the next 20 years.
I'm afraid I'm less optimistic. I'm afraid maybe not we, well, not all of us. I'm probably not on the panel anymore. But anyway, I think these debates will be led 20 years from now still. And I'm a bit pessimistic about the power of the young. If you go to the survey, there's a survey among the economists in the Verein für Sozialpolitik in Germany, and they have been asked, well, do you see the need of reform for macroeconomics or for economics as a whole? And you see, the older the people get, the more of them are open for reform. You get the most resistance against reform and alternative theories among the young academics. And I mean, this is something which, well, yeah, I hope that still there is a significant group of people who fights for pluralism and who teaches pluralism, but I'm afraid, well, this battle will not be over in 20 years.
Thank you very much. So I want to I'd like to thank all of our speakers for these interesting contributions.